Hey friends, it's Christy back with you on the My Favorite Things YouTube channel. Today I'm going to be making another Christmas card using the new Stacy Yakola Polar Opposites stamp set. Love these guys, so cute. I have stamped my images out on Spectrum Noir Ultra Smooth Premium White cardstock with Extreme Black Hybrid ink, and I will be coloring with my Copic markers. So I wanted to use some creamy shades for my polar bear, which is how you typically see them, especially when they're photographed against the snow. They just have this really cozy, creamy color to them. So I went with E50 and E51, just two shades, because I'm actually going to use the plain white cardstock to be my highlight. So I'm starting with the E51 and just going around and laying in any shadows where I feel like they should go. Anytime that a body part is overlapping another, like an arm laying over a leg, or anywhere that the artist has drawn the lines to indicate where the shadows should be. And then I'm coming in with that E50 and just flicking that color out into the white space. I want to be careful not to go too far with this because I still want him to look like a nice white polar bear. But like I said, I just wanted him to have that creamy look to him. So then I'm going to take the Colorless Blender, which is the 0 marker, and just go over the edge of the E50 to help that fade into the white. And then I decided to keep the coloring really simple on this card today, and so I'm going to use the same two shades for the white parts of my penguins, but I'm going to be really careful again to be very sparing with how much of those marker shades that I use. I want to leave a lot of that white cardstock showing so that they have their own unique look to them. So again, just doing that same process, starting with the E51, blending out with the E50, and then using that Colorless Blender to just soften the edge of the E50. And then I'm going to move on to my polar bear's muzzle. So polar bears actually have black skin underneath their fur. So I'm going to use C1, C3, and C5 to do all the other little places like the pads of his feet and paws, and also the insides of his ears. I decided to do that for something different as well. So I started with the C5 and then added in the C3. Some places I'm only going to get those two shades in, like all of his little pads of his toes, but all the rest of the places, like the other pads of his feet and his muzzle and the inside of his ears, I will also add in the C1. For the penguins, I wanted to just darken them up a bit, so I took away the C1 and added in the C7, so they are a little bit darker, not quite black. I wanted them to just look a little bit more cozy than a stark black, so I went with very dark grays. I'm using the C7 first, and I'm just coloring all three of them at once because they are pretty small and close together, so it's just easier than switching back and forth between the markers for each of these little guys. So once I have that C7 laid in every place that I think it should go, I'm going to come in with the C5, which is going to be my midtone, and start to blend that out. Again, there are going to be places where it kind of narrows out, where I only have those two shades, the two darkest shades, because they're usually shadowed areas where the light wouldn't kind of creep in. But anywhere else, I'm going to add that highlight with the C3 and just fill in all the rest of the white space that I've left behind. Now I want them to look really nice and fuzzy. The way that they are drawn with the kind of interrupted little dashes in the lines, it gives them that fuzzy look. But to keep with that, I want to make sure that I get a nice smooth blend. So I'm making sure to color right over the previous shade, just the edge of it, to make sure that I get a nice transition. I'm using YR04 and YR07 for their beaks and feet. Just the two shades since those are all really small areas. Again, putting those shadows on the part that is closest to the body, and then the highlight on the top or the ends of the feet. And then of course I wanted to help these guys look nice and cheerful by giving them some rosy cheeks. I'm using RV10 and RV11 for that today. So I wanted all of their accessories to match, and I'm going with a red and white combination for these. The quickest way to do the white stripes is to start out with them first and color everything in at once, because once you add the color over top, it'll just completely hide the fact that there's a gray underneath, especially with these light grays. I'm using W00 and W1. And then for the reds, I'm going to use R24, R29, and R39. So for the polar bear, that one is the largest, so there's definitely more surface area there. So I am going to do all three shades, and I am being really careful and just slowing down my coloring a bit because reds are notorious for bleeding outside of the line. So I do want to be really careful that I place everything in the right spot. So once I have the R39 laid down at the bottom edge of the scarf and the tails of the scarf, then I'm going to come in with the R29 and blend that out. On the end that's kind of hanging behind his body, I just used those darkest two shades, but for the part that's around his neck and then the front part that's dangling down, I am going to add the highlight with that R24. For the penguin with the knit cap, I decided not to bother coloring in all of those little lines on the brim and just use them as a textural element. So I'm just going to color that in solid using those same three shades of red. And then for the scarf on the penguin at the top, again, because those little dots are so tiny, I'm just not going to even bother coloring them in. I'm going to go right over top of them. Now you could go back later on with a white gel pen and kind of dot them in if you wanted the little polka dots to stand out. I didn't for this card. I thought there was enough going on in this scene by the time I got to the end of it that I didn't need to bother, but you certainly could do that. I gave him some mittens to match, and then for the other little guys, because those stripes are so narrow, I'm just going to use the one shade. I'm using the R29, and I'm just coloring them in solid. You could try to squeeze two shades in there if you wanted to have a little bit more shading, but I just decided to keep it simple for those guys since it was such a small area. For the penguin's glasses and the snowdrift, I'm adding a little frosty glow to those with the BG10, or in the case of the glasses, just the look of glass there. And then I'm going to trim these images out with their matching dies. For my background, I wanted to do some heat embossing, so I'm taking a piece of Bristol Smooth Surface cardstock and just dusting that all over with a powder tool. Mine is from Rabbit Hole Designs, but any powder tool would do. And then I'm going to ink up my stamp, which is the new Snowflake Flurry background. And I'm going to use some Versamark ink, which is just a clear sticky ink that works great for embossing because it grabs a hold of those powders. I'm going to add my paper to that panel and just press with my fingers all around to make sure that I get that really inked up, and then I can carefully lift that up. I'm going to use my reverse tweezers to hang on to that so I don't smudge the ink, and then I'm going to coat that with some white embossing powder to cover all of those beautiful snowflakes. And I don't know about you, but I always spill a little bit. I just can't help it. Then I'm going to take my heat gun, and I like to bring it to the back first to make sure that it kind of eliminates some of that warping by bending the paper in one direction, and then when you bring it to the front, it kind of bends it in the opposite direction. And I'm just going to heat set this until everything is melted and nice and shiny. I've trimmed that panel down with one of the A2 Stitch Rectangle Stacks Set 2, and I'm going to blend on some Distress inks. I'm not using my oxides today. I decided to use the regular Distress inks, and I'm starting with some Salty Ocean, And I'm just going to add that toward the center of the scene. The bottom is going to be completely covered up, so I didn't bother inking that part up. So once I'm happy with the layer of Salty Ocean, I want to darken up the sky by adding in some chipped sapphire. So I'm going to bring that down from the top of the scene so that it overlaps the edge of that salty ocean, and I'll get a nice transition between those two shades. So I'm going to add quite a bit of that to the top. I want it to really stand out and make those snowflakes pop. And then I will go back to the salty ocean and just smooth out the blend between the two. And then I wanted to distress this even further, so I'm going to spritz some clean water onto an acrylic block, and then I can pick that up with a paintbrush and tap it off the side so I get some little droplets which are going to react with those inks. And then I'm going to let that sit for maybe 30 seconds, and I'll blot that up with a paper towel. Then I wanted to add even more snow, so I'm taking some Dr. P.H. Martin's Bleed Proof White. You could use any kind of white ink or paint, acrylic paint or Copic Opaque White. This is just the one I have. I added that to the water that was still on my block to make it a little more fluid, and I'm going to tap that all over the background as well. So once I'm happy with how that's looking, I'm going to set this panel aside to dry. And I'm going to work on my sentiment, which I am stamping at the bottom of a snowdrift, which I trimmed out with one of the stitched slimline snowdrifts. So you don't need the slimline for this card, but that's the version of the snowdrift dies that I have. I find them really nice because you can use them for either A2 or slimline cards, and also mini slimlines. So I'm stamping out "Your friendship keeps me warm even on the coldest days." So technically this isn't even a Christmas card, it's more of a winter card, but you could definitely give it around the holidays. And then I'm doing an insert for the inside, and I'm stamping down the penguin with the glasses again, just because I think he's so adorable. And the sentiment says, "Thanks for being cool." So now I am ready to start assembling, and I'm going to glue the insert to the inside of my card base, which I made using red hot cardstock that I scored and folded to a standard A2 size card. And then I'll take the background piece and glue that to the outside. So I'm going to leave a little bit of a red border on both the inside and the outside, but because I use those stacks dies, it's just a little bit bigger on the inside than the outside. Then I will take the snowdrift and glue that down to the bottom of my scene. And because I want this snowdrift to match the one that I stamped and colored, just taking that BG10 and adding a little frosty glow to the top of the hill where the stitching line is. And then I'll take the stamped hillside and I'm going to add that right over top on the more towards the right hand side of the scene there. Then I'll take my images and kind of lay them out and figure out the placement of where I want everything to go. I knew I wanted the polar bear over toward the left, and then 2 of the penguins on the right and 1 on his left. So I'm just fiddling around with them a bit and making sure I have them where I want them. And then I'll take these 2 trees and I'm going to tuck them back behind the hillside. So the second one I wasn't sure if I wanted to put on the left-hand side of the card, but I decided to add it over on the right as well to just kind of balance out how big that polar bear is, to give that right-hand side a bit more visual weight as well. And then once I'm happy with where I have everything, I can start to glue the rest of my images down, just using liquid glue for everything. So this card is going to be really nice and flat for mailing. And I really just love how large these snowflakes are in comparison to the penguins and the polar bear. I just think it adds such a nice touch of whimsy. So I'm going to add a bit more snow using my Dr. P.H. Martin's Bleed Proof White again. I just wanted to have some of the snow falling in front of them as well, so that it really looks like a snowy scene and doesn't look like the snowflakes are just kind of falling in the backdrop. So I'm just going to go around using a little stylus and dot the snow on here and there until I'm happy with how that looks. And then I also wanted to add a little bit of sparkle, so I'm taking some Stardust Stickles and just dotting that in the very centers of all of the snowflakes. And since the snow is also made up of many thousands upon thousands of snowflakes, I thought it was only fitting that I also add a little bit of glitter to the snow. And that is going to finish this one off for today. So I will lift that up so you can see all of that detail and the sparkle and shine, and also give you a peek at the inside once again. I really hope you guys enjoyed this one. If you did, please be sure to hit that like button and leave me a comment down below. I love chatting with you guys. It's one of my favorite parts. And make sure that you subscribe to My Favorite Things for more inspiring videos like these here on screen. Thanks so much for watching. Bye-bye.